Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy is sponsored by Thomson Reuters, providing legal professionals with the intelligence, technology, and human expertise they need to find trusted answers. Products include Westlaw, Practical Law, and Firm Central legal practice management software for small law firms. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Online at thomsonreuters.com. Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the Greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is Life Illuminated. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan, acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. A Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology. Look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
Welcome. Access to Democracy returns. Alan Miller here, and we could not have a better guest for today's show than Professor David Schultz of Hamline University. You've seen him here many times before. He's even guest hosted for several occasions, and we'll be doing more of that in the future. And there is nobody who knows politics, the inside and the outside, better than Dave Schultz. Well, what can we talk about today? Russia, 33%.
Grand jury.
Grand jury, certainly. Donald Trump's golf abilities. Take your pick.
Okay, let's start with the grand jury, because I think this is really fascinating. And the story that's emerging is that Robert Mueller, who's special counsel investigating sort of the Trump-Russian connection, the story that's emerging, and again, we don't have all the details, is that he's using a grand jury at this point in terms of testing some of the investigations or basically testing some of the perhaps possible crimes that might be occurring out there. And that's significant because
criminal aspect of a grand jury is particularly interesting because it's far beyond an investigation.
Right.
Now they have enough information, they want to present it to these 23 people and let them determine whether any crimes have been committed.
Exactly. This is the standard process across the country that many states use and the federal government uses in terms of determining whether or not to indict somebody for a crime. You prosecutor, in this case special prosecutor, turns it over to a grand jury, presents the evidence. They make the decision regarding whether or not there's something indictable. Now, why this is significant is several scores. First is, you already pointed out, although it's probably the case that the fact-finding isn't over yet, the fact that it's now going to a stage where they're putting it before a grand jury is significant. Second, if in fact among the people who are being considered by the grand jury in terms of possibly to be indicted is Donald Trump, this is significant on so many scores, because we might recall, for those who are around, that back in the Watergate era, a grand jury wasn't sure if a president could be indicted, and he was named what? An unindicted co-conspirator. If in fact Trump is being considered for criminal charges, A, the fact he's being considered for criminal charges is significant, but two, this could be a major issue in terms of not just politically, but legally.
It could be a first.
It could be a first.
And it was different than the Bill Clinton story,
right?
Because Clinton, who like Trump, thought he was smarter than everybody else, ended up perjuring himself before the grand jury.
Right.
Well, it'd be very interesting to see what Trump would say if he ever went before a grand jury, which I don't think he will. I think that he will probably issue pardons to his whole family,
Right.
and walk away perhaps with a promise to be pardoned by Mike Pence if Pence takes over. It leaves us with so many possibilities.
Right.
And when I was on radio all week this week, and one of the things that got a rise out of some people was I described it as the Trump crime family. And I was asked, well, why do you call it a crime family? And I said, well, think about the mafia. Who heads each crime family in the mafia? A Don.
Right.
Well, what have we got here?
A Don, of course.
Yes.
Correct. But also, I think it's an interesting analogy here because we do increasingly seem to have many members of his family, direct family, plus like son-in-laws and so forth like that, seem to be swept up in a lot of different things. And it's not just an investigation that looks at whether or not there was Trump campaign collusion with the Russians last year, but there's also now apparently an expansion that looks at Trump business dealings with Russians and perhaps other issues in terms of lying under oath. So a lot of things are really going on at this point, and so it's not just singularly about a political question.
How a house that he bought, or a property that he bought for $25 million and was appraised at about $40 million, sold to one of the Russian oligarchs for almost $100 million within 2 years. Things like that. They call perhaps money laundering.
Yes.
Is one of the things that we have heard. But there are so many tentacles out there, are so many ramifications. And the most incredible thing to me is that he brought it mostly on himself with his mouth.
He did. I was going to say is that how much of this would have been discovered had he basically shut up after the election or in the early part of his administration? Who knows how far it would have gone. But also I think, so he's brought it on himself in terms of that. But two, one of the things that if I could actually give him good advice, if I had like a magic wand and were to wave it, that magic wand would be to say, take away his cell phone, take away his Twitter account, because he just exacerbates the problems, whether it's in terms of the immigration ban that he did before or whatever he's doing. His statements are now increasingly being used against him, either as evidence, as leads in court, as leads for the investigation. He's his own worst enemy. I'm a law professor. If I were advising him, I would say, shut up.
And I'm
Just
sure
shut up.
his lawyers have said that.
Yes.
But they haven't been, at least up to the point where General Kelly arrived on the scene. They have not been able to control him.
Right.
And he just gets himself deeper and deeper. Even the 2 phone calls that were released yesterday, plus the fact that he's a pathological liar and can't tell the truth, or will contradict himself within 5 minutes and deny that he said what he said 5 minutes earlier. All these things militate against him.
They do, and I had somebody ask me recently and say, well, with all this lying he's doing, with all of what he's doing, isn't it not going to have an impact on his presidency? And I said, yeah, it already has in 2 different ways. First is the fact that his administration is so preoccupied with all these other problems, it can't move on its legislative agenda. Contrary to what Trump thinks, he has one of the worst records in terms of a passage of legislative agenda in the opening, 6 months of a presidency ever. He's not passed one major piece of legislation. But 2, the Quinnipiac poll that came out this week has his approval rating at 33%, including showing some of those white working class that voted for him are now starting to walk away from him. So what we're starting to see is a significant erosion of his legitimacy as a president and the support and trust that he needs to govern.
And you're seeing it also in the Senate, and you're seeing it in the House, where despite his threats, for instance, over health care, you don't recess until we do away with Obamacare, they just ignored him and went about their business. And for the first time, some members of Congress are speaking out against him. That would never have happened 6 months ago, and it didn't happen 6 months ago, except that he can't keep his mouth shut.
He can't keep his mouth shut. I think he's increasingly becoming a potential political liability for the Republicans going into 2018 election cycle. And I would also say at this point that what he's starting to realize, well, he's not realizing, what we're starting to see here is that the person who supposedly was famous for the art of the deal, the great negotiator, apparently he's not that good of a negotiator with Congress. Somehow thinking that berating, threatening, insulting people is the way to get what he wants. Well, I don't know about you. I always learned that good negotiators, it's about win-win. Can I offer you something that in return you get something out of it, I get something out of it? It's not me saying, hey, Alan, you're a knucklehead. Do something I want.
No,
and
only
Trump
Sharon can say that and get away with it.
But the point is that good negotiators can't win by just insulting people. And that's what he seems to think. And the fact that he's threatened people and they can defy him and get away with it is why he's lost some significant influence. They're not scared of Trump.
It probably worked in the business world.
Right.
I mean, he started off with, I think, $100 million gift from his father, and that gave him a position that he never would have had otherwise. And he's built it from there. But then you look at his business acumen, and how many bankruptcies are in there? How do you have a casino that goes bankrupt? I mean, you know, if you really have to look at the fundamentals, what is a casino? A casino is a money-making endeavor, except Trump made money on those casinos just by lending his name to them, but they went under, four of them in Atlantic City, and I think he's had 2 other bankruptcies. It's a whole different world, and you're dealing with some savvy people in politics. And the sad part is that he has brought people into his aegis, into his confidence, into his term, who are really people not interested in what this country stands for, but they are people like Bannon who would take this country down, destroy our reputation, which is in tatters at the moment also. It's not liberty. It's not freedom. It seems to be focusing on money.
It is. I mean, this is sort of a situation where we really do have we forget about this sometimes. We really do have a capitalist democracy. But the emphasis on the capitalist, and Trump has made it more that. He's made it the democracy for the few. For those few people who have lots of money, the system works exceedingly well. But for the rest of the 99%, the system isn't working well. And the irony is he ran as the champion of what? Working class America. There's nothing that he's done since he's taken office that really works to the advantage of helping those core group of people who voted for him. And his opposition, as we noted, to Obamacare, the efforts to try to repeal it, would have had a disproportionate impact in the states and upon the people who voted for him and Republicans.
And why would you want to take away from your base to begin with, let alone people in general, health care? Make it better. Yes, there's flaws in it, and they have to work on the monetary end of it, but make it better.
I agree. I think what's become clear for both the Republicans and Donald Trump, there's one thing that defined them for the last 7 years: opposition to Barack Obama. Singularly, that was it. Whether it's on health care, environment, et cetera, et cetera. There's no real vision that Trump has for the world or Republicans have for the world outside of the fact that it's what? A vision that says, let's erase Obama's legacy. And that, I think, is
bit by bit.
Exactly. And they have no positive alternative from which to replace it. Yes, the Affordable Care Act has flaws. For those people who make too much money to qualify for the subsidies, they're seeing the rates go up. Overall, the Affordable Care Act hasn't stemmed the cost curve. However, these are things that are fixable if Congress works with the president, and if a president were to have a vision for what he wants to do. Remember during the campaign, he said, we'll have a plan to fix it, and it'll be what? Terrific. I think it was his phrase. It'll be terrific.
Well, everything he advocates will be the best, terrific. It's like the biggest crowd at the inauguration that
Right.
ever existed, except that the crowd didn't exist at the inauguration, except in his mind.
Right.
He lives in an alternate reality.
He does, and it's an alternative reality with alternative facts. It's a world in which I think George Orwell from 1984 foreshadowed many, many years ago. And in so many ways, that's what we see coming out of Trump, is this effort to sort of say, I can't win by legitimate reasons. I can't sort of message with the facts. I'll create dissension, false facts, images and things, and to confuse people as to what's really going on.
And for instance, the popular vote. He cannot reconcile himself to the fact that he was 3 million votes short in the popular vote.
To a woman, no less.
But that's even worse.
Of course it's
in
worse.
his mind.
Of course it is.
Misogynist that he is.
That's right.
And so he creates this fiction of voter fraud, which if you go state by state by state by state, you find, and we had Steve Simon on not too long ago, our Secretary of State, it's like 0.0001 in cases of voter fraud.
Right. You have a better chance of being struck by lightning than showing and proving a case of voter fraud in the United States.
So where do we go from here?
That's the tough part.
What's the Russian story? What's the connection? Is that why he won't let us see his taxes? Is he really in hock? Putin just threw how many people? 755 out of our embassy. Not a word came out of Trump's mouth about that.
Except there's rumor that he, right before he signed the bill, he called Putin. Whether or not that's true or not, we don't know. But there's a rumor that he actually did that. But no, that's could be the reason why he's not criticizing the Russians, criticizing Putin, is because of those very tight, close financial relationships he might have with a lot of the Russian oligarchs. And that could also be the reason why he doesn't want anybody to see his taxes, why the Russians were willing to work with him, it appears, to offer dirt about Hillary Clinton. There's something going on there, and that's the part of the investigation that Mueller announced that he was focused or suggested recently that he was keying in on, the Trump financial connection. And that's the part also that Trump seems to be most upset by. There is this sense in which, I still love Shakespeare. I love Macbeth, the great Lady Macbeth line, the lady doth protest too much. Trump seems to protest too much when he says, there's nothing in my finances, there's nothing here, nothing like that. That almost as if he's cluing us in to where the problem is.
He can't play it straight.
Right.
He can never play it straight. He always has to either cheat or be sort of fuzzy around the edges. Now, you tell an interesting story about his golf prowess. Yeah. So why don't you relate that to us?
It was a great piece I was reading, I think it was in the Washington Post the last few days, that first pointed out that Donald Trump actually is a very good golfer. He may be the best golfer ever in the White House. He has a handicap of about 3. I'm not a golfer, but I've been told a handicap of 3 is very good. But even though he's a very good golfer, and by the way, he's golfing more in the White House than Obama ever did, even though he criticized him, but it says that when he golfs, he's the rudest golfer in the world. He talks when other people are putting. He drives his cart on the greens. He always takes mulligans, wants do-overs. And if you think of sports as the metaphors for life, that people's real personalities come out when they're playing sports, Trump's comes out with golf. What is he? A whiner, a cheater, a liar. All those things come out. It was a wonderful piece to read in the Washington Post that sort of captured him, Donald Trump, as the person he really is on a golf course.
And the person that he really is in life.
Exactly. Exactly. There are some people who what you see is not what you get, or what you get is not what you see, whatever the phrase is there, that we have a split between people's private lives and workplace lives. There's no question that Trump has made it clear he is who he is, and his statements about women, about prisoners of war, about Muslims, about Mexicans, fill in the blank, et cetera, when you get enough racist, misogynist statements, at some point it's hard to just say he's not a racist and misogynist. He clearly is using the type of language, acting in ways that really suggest who he is.
Out of his own mouth.
Exactly.
I mean, this stuff doesn't come by way of speculation. This comes by way of actual words, and the two phone conversations, the text of which were released yesterday by the Washington Post, are perfect indication of that. He practically begged the Mexican president, you've got to help me out on this wall.
That's right.
You've got to say that we'll work it out.
Yeah.
You can't make it look like I'm embarrassed that you're
That's
not
right.
going to pay for it. And then he absolutely abused the Prime Minister of Australia. I mean, these are our allies. He has alienated so many of our allies already, even at the G20, even at the earlier meeting where he pushed someone out of his way so he could get into the front row for the picture.
Right.
The premier of one of the countries, I don't remember.
Right. Well, the other thing that I've noticed too about it, I just got back from teaching in China for a couple of weeks, and what I found when I was talking to Chinese citizens is how perplexed they were. Perplexed about how the United States could elect somebody like a Donald Trump, and perplexed in the sense of saying that here is somebody who thinks he can bully around the world, tell China what to do, tell North Korea what to do, et cetera, et cetera. And they were remarking on how he just seems to just not understand that putting America's first doesn't mean that America first is only about the United States. That the world that we're experiencing for the last 70 years, as Henry Luce said, the American century was a world that we created by what? By being engaged in the world, by working with other countries, for good or bad sometimes. And what Trump's narrow-minded approach is to say, we're going to build a wall around ourselves and not care about the rest of the world. Well, if that's the case, how are we going to sell our products to the rest of the world?
Would have worked in 1850.
Oh, 1850 would have been great. It would have been absolutely great. Maybe even in 1900. But guess what? The globalization door is open. It's not going away. We are interconnected. Additionally, we are the largest economy in the world. We are the largest military spender in the world. We are intimately connected in a world that we have created. And yes, it's not always the world that we want to live in, but it's more hospitable to the United States than it is hostile to the United States. And to withdraw from that world, again, to build that wall that he wants around the United States, would severely damage the United States economically, politically, and globally.
And we see that that's happening, notwithstanding the fact that the stock market is going up because that aspect of society is doing well. And people have 401s, yes,
Right.
but the really big stockholders are really the top 1%, the top 2%. The average person is struggling to meet their costs, whether it be health care or whatever, even in terms of food and the necessities that one has to have. Government has to, and I heard a great quote from Keith Ellison today, in effect, that you pay your taxes and government provides you with the necessary, and your taxes are what fuels government. You expect public safety, you
Right.
expect that. You expect in the rest of the world health care.
Right.
You expect in most of the rest of the world education without having to go into bankruptcy. You expect that they will protect your environment so your children can have a place to live and keep the infrastructure existent and modernized so you don't have bridges that fall into the Mississippi River. Those are the things that you would expect, and for that you pay taxes. We are not the highest taxed country in the world. We are up there. We're probably 6th or 7th, but we have so much more. There's a reason why people want to come here and get away from the despots in their countries to get away from the poverty. And that reason has existed for 200 years, and it still exists.
It still exists. The United States is still viewed by many as that shining city on the hill, although Trump is taking away a lot of that luster. We're already starting to see signs of that in terms of our diminished role across the world. We're starting to see countries like Germany say we can't rely upon the United States anymore. When I was in China teaching, I increasingly heard people talking about whether or not the United States was the place to go to study, for example. So across the board, maybe the real wall, I guess, is his mouth. His mouth has created a wall around the United States that's creating all types of barriers, barriers that shouldn't exist because we and the world are much better off, for example, with immigration. I mean, think about this, what he rolled out this past week as endorsing the idea of cutting back on low-skilled immigration and only emphasizing those at the high end, high-skilled. Well, lots of the agricultural industry, a lot of companies in the United States depend upon immigration.
And they've spoken out. They have spoken out saying, we don't have people
That's right.
to pick our vegetables. We don't have people to work the fields.
Exactly.
And he's going to keep them out of the country.
Right. And I want to throw one more part to it. But he also said that he wants to allow for more high-skilled workers to come in. You know what that's going to do? Drive down wages for people who are already high-skilled because it's going to be more competition. So if you think about it, his proposals hurt both working class, middle class, they hurt workers in general in terms of what he wants to do.
And yet he goes to West Virginia, and you look at the 13 faces behind him, the 13 Caucasian faces behind him, cheering, and you wonder, this 33%, was it bust in? Or what is the matter with these people? Are they so divorced from reality like he is that they don't see what's happening? What do they rely on for their facts? Where did they get their information? Don't they see what's happening?
Yeah, no, you're hitting at, I think, one of the toughest issues in politics right now is the fact that we have a fragmented media where not everybody gets the same facts or experiences the same common body of knowledge that we saw 40 or 50 years ago. We see an electorate that's incredibly polarized, and we know many people are gripped by cognitive dissonance, the idea of they're never going to accept facts contrary to what they believe in. We've got people who are distrustful, people who have not seen the economy work to their benefit for years. We've got a lot of things going on, the point is here. But what we have is a situation now where Trump can continue to spew those alternative facts and still get what? 33%
beyond my comprehension.
Yeah, people who still believe all the different things that he's saying, even though there's almost no evidence to it. He lied about, for example, recently about conversations with the national head of the Boy Scouts, about the Mexican president,
About the police.
About the police. He constantly espouses statements that just don't stand up to facts. Yet there's still a third of our electorate that says, I support him and I trust him.
And that is the frightening thing.
It is.
And it's always really a pleasure to have you here and to engage in something that we don't engage in this country that much, which is communication.
Yes.
And being able to have a give and take.
Yeah.
And although in this case we're pretty much both in the same position.
Right.
But I can't get some of our Republican office holders in here anymore because they don't want to hear it and they don't want to engage in it and they don't want to say what they voted for or explain why they voted for it. But it's so important for people to get involved, to be awake, and to be ready to get themselves engaged. David Schultz, thank you so much for coming in.
Anytime. Have me back again.